Another domino of democracy falls in West Africa. The UN and regional bodies like the AU have all condemned the military takeover in Burkina Faso. ECOWAS has suspended the country from its governing bodies. Army officers there say they detained President Roch Christian Kabore because he was failing to tackle a jihadist insurgency. The military takeover drew popular support, with hundreds of people taking to the streets of the capital to cheer on the junta. In his first speech, Burkina Faso's new military leader, Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Damiba, promised the country would return to constitutional order someday.
When the conditions are right, according to the deadline that our people will define in all sovereignty, I commit to a return to a normal constitutional order. Fellow citizens, people of Burkina Faso in the diaspora, while there are many priorities, it is clear that the main priority remains security. I understand the legitimate doubts raised by this break in the normal functioning of the state. But I would like to reassure all friends of Burkina Faso that the country will continue to respect its international commitments, particularly with regard to the respect of human rights.
A clear pledge there from Burkina Faso's new leader. Now here's a look at how he came to power.
There's little doubt who's in control in Ouagadougou. Members of the deposed government stand respectfully as their military rulers march in. Burkina Faso's democratically elected politicians can only sit and watch. Their ouster brought jubilation to the streets of the capital and celebrations across the country. It's now in the hands of the patriotic movement for preservation and restoration. Many here are pinning their hopes for change on the new strongman, Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Damiba.
We shouted, we cried, we asked for help from the outgoing president, and he didn't listen to us. Our region was attacked. We shouted everywhere, but there was no help.
Their hope is that the army can restore order to this crisis-ridden country. One of the world's poorest, it's seen a jihadist insurgency sweep in from neighbouring Mali. Last November, at least 57 people, mostly ill-equipped state security forces, were slaughtered in an attack on the north. President Kabore's failure to tackle the chaos was a major factor in his downfall. He's said to be safe. National television broadcast his handwritten letter saying he was stepping down, quote, in the higher interests of the nation. Opposition figures said Kabore's departure was long overdue. You can't put a lid on a pot to stop the water from boiling. It will explode, and that's what's happening. That doesn't mean it was the choice of the Burkinabe, but a change was absolutely necessary. But the coup brought swift condemnation from the United Nations.
Democratic societies are a value that must be preserved. The role of military must be to defend their countries and their peoples, not to attack their governments and to fight for power.
But the list of military takeovers in West Africa's arc of instability just got longer, begging the question, does democracy have a future in the Sahel?
For more on this, I am joined by Onela Modran, head of the Sahel program at the Institute for Security Studies based in Bamako in neighboring Mali. Hello, thanks for joining us. Now, coups have now happened in Mali where you are, Guinea, Burkina Faso, Chad, Sudan, an attempted coup in Niger. Is democracy dying in the Sahel?
Well, I think more than democracy, what is in crisis is governance and political systems. So in all three countries where we have faced situations in which elected presidents have been contested due to the lack of reactiveness of their governance. In the case of Burkina, one of the leading reasons behind the coup is the exasperation of the people towards a security situation that continued to deteriorate year in, year out. So instead of democracy, generally speaking, I think what is in crisis is the way in which power is actually exercised after elections.
I mean, we saw protesters, I should say, on the streets who were basically chanting support from the Russian Wagner mercenaries. So that makes me want to throw this question at you, that contrary to increasing anti-French sentiments, there seems to be growing support for the arrival of the Russian Wagner mercenaries in the region. Why is that, you think?
Well, this particular issue, I think, started mainly in Mali, but as you mentioned, I mean, across the region, there is a growing sense of impatience towards a set of military partnerships which people feel have not delivered. This is the case for France, which is at the center of attention due to the size of the Barkhane operation, but also due to, you know, the whole colonial history between France and this country. But I mean, beyond the reconfiguration of partnerships, I think what should be questioned actually is not just who fights alongside the national forces, whether it's Barkhane or the Russians or other. What we should be wondering about is whether the strategy that's being used is likely to work at all. This strategy has been mainly focused on military action and lacking a political framework. Maybe this is one of the elements that should actually be brought in.
Exactly. Well, with that said, what could be an alternative strategy that could actually work?
This, I think, should be defined at a national level. Each of these countries, despite, you know, the fact that they're sharing a common challenge, also have their own internal, very specific strengths, right? So in Mali, for instance, one of the elements that have been considered in the past was the possibility of starting a form of dialogue with some of these groups. Perhaps, you know, alongside fighting it, also talking out some aspects of the root causes could be an option. More generally, I mean, I think it's also important, and let me just add this, it's also important to actually look at the root causes that are motivating people for joining these groups. And these have their roots in governance issues. You know, it's the lack of access to justice, to basic social services, to fair and equal opportunity. These are things that are solved by politics, not by fighting.
Okay, now a quick one on this before you go. Can regional bodies like the AU and ECOWAS be trusted to bring back constitutional order, or does it need external help?
Well, I mean, the ECOWAS is clearly challenged in the region. It's perceived as, as an organization that's supporting incumbents no matter what, which is definitely harming its credibility and its legitimacy. The recent imposition of sanctions on Mali has made this worse. So going forward, it will be important for this particular organization to rethink its approach into something that would likely be a bit of a more constructive and less exclusively punitive approach. The AU clearly has leverages and options to help in this process should the ECOWAS welcome this help.
Okay. Onella Modran, head of the Sahel program at the Institute for Security Studies. Thank you so much for your time.
It was a pleasure.
Now, while people are celebrating a military takeover in Burkina Faso, it's quite the opposite in Sudan. 3 months after the last coup there, many are pushing for a return to civilian rule, even at the cost of their lives. More than 70 protesters have died since the military seized power in October. Once again, pro-democracy protests escalated this week in the Sudanese capital of Khartoum after security forces opened fire. Despite the danger, more and more people are taking to the streets to increase the pressure on the regime. Our correspondent Adrian Krish is in Sudan, and he sent us this report from Khartoum.
A call for action for demonstrators in Sudan's capital Khartoum, including Sharifa Abdullah. Since the military coup in October, people have taken to the streets every week, calling for democracy.
I want the civilian government to return to power. The military turned back the clock because they don't want a civilian and democratic government. They raped women. They killed revolutionaries. With our protests, we will make sure the democratic system comes back.
For Sharifa Abdullah, the fight against the military regime is personal. On the banner, a picture of her son. He was a doctor shot dead while trying to help other protesters. Recently, Sudan had been moving towards becoming a democracy, but this latest military takeover has crushed all hopes. General Abdel al-Burhan is now in charge, and the protesters want him out. But once again, they're facing a stiff pushback from the security forces.
So this has been the reality here for weeks. You can see a lot of people are getting injured during the protests. The security forces are responding with violence towards the demonstrators. More than 70 demonstrators were killed since the military coup in October, and thousands were injured.
Neighborhood committees are blocking access to their streets, fearing attacks by the security forces. It's a grassroots movement. The protests are not being organized by political parties. The people want a civilian government and no compromises with the military. But the military has lots to lose, says human rights activist Mudawi Ibrahim Adam. After the coup, he was offered the position of a new civilian prime minister by the military to appease protesters. But he refused. He doesn't believe they want to reform.
On the discussion, I said, I know the problem. You are scared that you are giving power to the civilians, and they are going to lift your immunity. And then you are going to face charges, and you are going to be taken to the court.
Justice is also what Sharifa Abdullah wants. Back at her house, a mural reminds her every day of her son Babikar.
He would be happy seeing us continuing what he started and what he believed in. And it would make him even happier if we succeed in getting democracy. The truth is that people are still dying, and that is very tragic. But we will succeed, and this will make him very happy.
Sharifa Abdullah says she will continue to join other protesters in their goal of democratic change for Sudan. She says they owe that to the many people who have paid the ultimate price.